I'm Matt Dixon, and welcome to the Purple Patch Podcast. The mission of Purple Patch is to empower and educate every human being to reach their athletic potential. Through the lens of athletic potential, you reach your human potential. The purpose of this podcast is to help time-starved people everywhere integrate sport into life. Imagine what it's like if every day you can bring your best. You feel better, you have stable and high energy. You have great cognitive function. That comes with an investment. It's absolutely achievable, where predictably and consistently we can bring our very best. One of the tools that we leverage at Purple Patch to try and help refine our focus and drive us onto the path of our potential is Inside Tracker. And that's because by taking a look inside and assessing your biometrics, you can leverage the insights and recommendations from the team of scientists, receive an action plan so that you can filter out much of the contradiction and confusion around where you should place your focus and understand what you should do for you to yield the best results. Now, beyond that, of course, it takes your commitment, your hard work, all of your commitments that are necessary for you to yield success. But at least you have precision and specificity of the things that are going to help you relative to where you're currently at. And that's why we love to leverage it. I use it myself. It's really beneficial. I love my athletes to use it, and you can benefit too. All you need to do is head to insidetracker.com/purplepatch. That's insidetracker.com/purplepatch. And use this code PurplePatchPro20. That's going to get you a nice hefty discount of anything at the store. All right, we're talking about high performance today, and so enjoy the show. And welcome to the Purple Patch Podcast. As ever, your host, Matt Dixon. And last week, if you're a fan of the Tour de France, we saw one of the greatest achievements ever in sport. At least I believe it is. Mark Cavendish winning his 35th stage victory. 35 of them. It's quite amazing. His story is one in which it is an athlete that is full of passion for the process, the joy and love of the sport of cycling. But along his way, he's had to navigate so many obstacles, setbacks and failures. Just last year, if you're a fan of the sport, you'll probably remember Mark crashing out in the stage, breaking his collarbone. Seemingly that career being done, but he decided to come back. And last week, he got that elusive victory. And so, what can we learn from Mark's journey? How are we like one of these legends of the sport? Today we're going to dig into mindset a little bit, and we're going to unpack some of the traits and characteristics of a high-performance mindset that, in my observation, over the course of 20 years working with world-class athletes and leaders of major organizations, we can identify, and it turns out, teach, learn, educate, hone, develop these traits that are going to help us show up better, more predictably in anything that we're placing our focus on. It's going to be a fun one. It's all built around an answer to a simple question that I received last week. And so we're not going to do Coach's Corner this week. We're just going to dive right into it. Folks, we're talking the traits of high performance. It is the meat and potatoes. Yes, folks, the meat and potatoes. And in the introduction, I talked about Mark Cavendish, cyclist. But interestingly, the catalyst for this episode today was actually a question I received from an athlete that I coach. I got it last week, and it was born out of a question actually originating from his viewing of the Olympic swimming trials, which of course the Olympics are coming up very, very soon. So I'm going to read out the question, and it will give you some context of why I decided to build this show today. The question is this: I was watching the Olympic swimming trials and was awed by some of the returning athletes that are making their second or third Olympic Games. And it made me think about the mindset of a winner. They seem to be so tough, seemingly calm, and there are so many stories embedded in the navigation of this year's trials around comebacks. Is there anything that us mere mortals can learn from and apply to our lives? Well, it turns out there is. You don't need to be an elite athlete to draw from their approach or the traits of their mindset. The question is so compelling that I decided to build all of today's show around this. So let's get to it. We're going to break it up into a couple of parts here. But first, in part one, we want to talk about sustained high performance and specifically high performers. I'm sure as a listener, we all can share in a common set of aspirations, if you want to call it that. I assume that we want to feel good. We want to be able to bring our best to every day, to the things that are most important to us. And of course, we hope for great staying power, resilience, ability to handle anything that is thrown our way along the journey. Consider this. When you feel good, you bring better. And when you put your energy into the most valuable aspects of success, you're going to yield bigger results. And when you have the ability to stay the course and handle any setbacks or unexpected stresses, you're going to be equipped for long-term success. And for me, this is sustained high performance. Imagine that you have this every day. You bring it every day. Great traits, great energy, bringing your best. But now imagine being in a team where every member of that team has this and brings it every single day. I can only imagine what that would do to productivity, output, and results. For me, this is sustained high performance. I've worked with many of the world's elite Ironman athletes. I've also worked with leading executives from major organizations. And the pattern that I've observed is that the highest performers, the folks with staying power, longevity, that go on to create greatness, display a common set of traits and characteristics that make up a high-performance mindset. It's no wonder that I used to say, coach the pros like CEOs and the CEOs like pros. So these traits include various things. Let me just run them off really quickly. Number 1, grit and resilience. Number 2, driven by purpose, really understanding their why. Number 3, they always have a passion for the process. They tend to be more process-driven than outcome-driven. They have a quest to drive a reduction of the complex into simple and actionable, focusing their energy and prioritizing the actions on the important stuff that's going to drive results. Universally, they tend to be really coachable. They have high adaptability and resilience. They develop a positive relationship with stress and pressure, realizing that that is necessary, a privilege almost, something that is going to drive them to growth. They also have a great T-shaped perspective, as I like to call it. In other words, a keen ability to come out of the day-to-day weeds and come up for perspective, as well as reflection. What have they done well? Where do they need to improve? And universally, they value mechanisms of support and accountability, often thriving within a team mindset. So these are all things that I'm sure you've heard before, you could perhaps identify with. But if we pause and we consider that list, if you can develop and hone these traits, surely you're equipped for a performance journey, no matter where you're placing your energy, no matter what is important to you, athletics or anything else in the world. In other words, these are a toolkit in a way to maximize what you bring to the table, your intelligence, your physical gifts, your commitment and work ethic towards that goal or journey. Now, world-class athletes, they develop these traits, and they're fundamental to anyone becoming a champion. And leading executives hone and develop these traits, and they end up being critical to becoming a highly effective leader. But we shouldn't just shine the light on the brain, on the mindset. We also, I think, need to not forget the physical part of this. And these traits are, of course, fundamental to the equation. But over the last 20 plus years of coaching high performers, I've observed that it's impossible to consistently put these traits into action if you're existing in a world of suppressed energy, health, lethargy. So unless you can bring your best physical self, you're going to be ill-equipped to actually maximize these critical traits consistently and predictably. So what do I mean by this, by putting this into action? Well, let's think about athletes for a second. If you are, say, really overtrained, In other words, you're working very, very hard, you're extremely fit, but you're existing in a fog of fatigue. It's impossible then for you to bring many of these traits into action because your body is just suppressed. Now, I'm not sure whether it was General Patton or Vince Lombardi, but the quote that you might have heard, "Fatigue makes cowards of us all," that bubbles up to the surface when we think about this. If you're tired, chronically tired, whether it's from too much training, underfueling, a lack of recovery, whatever it is, you might be really fit as an athlete, but you're not fresh. And that severely limits your ability to bring the necessary traits, the elite mindset, to help you go on to be a champion. Now that's the athletes, but now let's talk about the business professionals. So if you're trying to bring your best in the workplace, well, you might be really tough, committed. You might be willing to do what is ever necessary, pulling all-nighters so that you get the job done, so that you can fulfill your role to the max. And there's a lot of people that will put a lot of stuff aside to get to the goal in business. But ultimately, what I see is if you failed to prioritize your own health and well-being, and you decide not to prioritize and consistently commit to some of the key habits and processes that go through to help process stress, such as movement, proper sleep, quality eating, and you are too walking around in suppressed health or at least a fog of fatigue, it will undoubtedly, and all research shows it, suppress your ability to deploy these same traits. In other words, your energy will be lower, your cognitive function will be compromised, and whether you're aware of it or not, you will be battling your body relative to what you could potentially feel like. And so in other words, in order to hone, improve, and develop these key traits that make up an elite mindset, I believe that first, all of us, no matter where we're trying to show up in life, first need to build a platform of physical readiness. And so while today's show is, yes, shining the light on these elite traits, we need to remember that they are in lockstep with your physical well-being, a performance-based layer, as I like to call it. You cannot unlock and separate them. You can't have one without the other. And so in part 2, we're going to dig into these traits a little bit and understand how they're developed and how they're important across all aspects of performance. But first, let's talk about the Tri-Squad a little bit. Yes, the Purple Patch Tri-Squad, it is so much more than just a simple training plan. This is a triathlon program designed from the ground up, specifically for time-starved athletes like you. And added to that, it is a human coaching program with a proven methodology that has delivered multiple amateur world champions, more than 1,500 qualifiers to world championship events, countless PRs, and an unimaginable amount of first-time finishers. It is a program that integrates into your life. It's going to help you get faster, and that's great. But it's also going to superfuel your performance across all other aspects of life. I promise you that this can transform your performance. All you need to do is email us at info@purplepatchfitness.com, set up a complimentary call, and then you can be on program within minutes. And if you don't like it, and we think you will, but if you don't for any reason, we'll refund your money within the first 30 days. It's pretty good. Let's get on with it. I'd love to invite you into the gang. All right, let's get on with the show. Yes, welcome to part 2. We're going to dig into some of the traits of excellence and high performance. When I coach a high performer across any arena, a part of my role is to unpack many of the traits that are necessary of a high performance mindset. And then I need to set up the journey and establish the conditions so that I can educate and teach them. I can help foster, hone, and develop them within the athlete or the high performer across any other aspect of life, and guide that person towards awareness so that they can deploy and action these traits when required. And they're going to get that development mostly through experiential learning. In other words, through their performance journey, that becomes a wonderful arena that we actually go through experiences where they pop up. that they're forced to deploy them and they start to actually understand their context. Now, let's first remind ourselves of those traits. You make a commitment to a goal. Perhaps you register for a big event, or you decide that you're going to transform your health and well-being, and you embark on the journey. What's going to drive your success? Okay, you're tough, you're committed, you've got a work ethic, you've laid down the marker, you're existing in a framework, and you get going. But along that journey, what are some of the traits and characteristics that are going to help you ultimately drive to success? Well, I mentioned it earlier in the show. Pretty simple. Grit and resilience, driven by purpose, a passion for the process, a drive to reduce complexity so that you prioritize the things that are going to really yield results. Great coachability, highly adaptable and resilient, a positive relationship with stress, not wilting or running away from it, but building a relationship of understanding that that is necessary for you to grow and improve. That perspective that's so important, pausing periodically to reflect. What am I doing well? How do I need to course correct? Where do I need to involve things that are not going quite so well? And of course, finally, existing within a team environment where you have mechanisms of great support and accountability. These are traits. These are characteristics. Consider an elite athlete. Remember, the way that these traits are developed is through their journey in sport. Let me ask you a question to put this into context. Why do you think it is that so many companies and organizations love to hire ex-professional athletes? I tell you what, it's probably not because of their nice bodies. I think the reason is because the hiring team of that organization kind of knows what they're getting. They know that they'll be adding to their team someone that knows and buys into and can showcase what commitment looks like. They know that they're going to be full of grit, that they're probably pretty good at collaboration. They're able to communicate well. They're highly adaptable and resilient. They're able to thrive under pressure. And they're going to have staying power for the journey. They're certainly goal-driven. And if you think about it and pause for a second, that sounds like a pretty great team member, doesn't it? Someone that's going to be right there by your side. But here's the news. Here's where it gets really interesting for me. These traits and characteristics, they're not genetic. They're not innate. In fact, they can be learned, developed, coached even. And that's really good news. For me, that reeks of opportunity. It really does. Because this example here of an athlete that retires and then gets hired into an organization showcases a couple of things. Number one, firstly, you can absolutely hone and develop these very same traits. They're not reserved for elite athletes. If they're not genetic and they're not innate, then they can be developed. And that's different. If I take an elite athlete and we look at their VO2 max, a measure of their maximal ability to uptake and utilize oxygen, well, there is a genetic component. Not all of us are designed and built with lungs the size of a rhinoceros, but some elite athletes are. It's not an equal playing field. But these traits, they can be developed. And so that's good news for us. But on top of that as well, my example of taking a world-class athlete and the employer hiring them because they know that they're going to get these traits also showcases something else. And that's that these traits are transferable. You can hone and develop them in one arena, but you can apply them in any aspect of your life. Let me give you an example of this. I've talked about this before, but Purple Patch Pro Sarah Piampiano, she built a decade-long, highly successful professional triathlon career. She won multiple Ironman races. And coming into the sport, amongst the thin air of world-class performance, she wasn't the most genetically gifted athlete. She didn't have huge physiological traits, but she made up for those limitations via her mindset and her approach. And she honed and developed these traits, and she became a champion. And then she retired at the age of 40. What the heck is she going to do next? Well, she decided to turn to real estate, and it was an industry that she had exactly zero experience, no background whatsoever. And it only took 2 years for her to develop her own thriving business. And all it was a simple application of the very same traits that drove her to great elite results in sport, just applied in a different setting. In other words, the brain never knows what context it is in. And that's really good news. So our question now is, what is the best path for you to action and develop these traits for yourself? We're going to get to that in part 3. So if you're committed to something, you can follow a training plan. And guess what? It might prepare you physically. Super duper, it might even be one of those magical AI plans. But let me ask you a question. How do you maximize the odds of showing up and enjoying a breakthrough performance? That's not going to emerge just from a training plan. That emerges by taking a broader perspective on performance, taking a human approach to your readiness. When you become a Purple Patch athlete, you have a whole team of coaches and experts that have got your back, and that includes me. You've also got a global team of like-minded athletes that are going to maximize your support, your fun, and even a little healthy dose of accountability. And you get guided and coached, not just across the right training sessions for you, but also around mindset, race strategy, fueling, hydration, recovery, and so much more. And I believe this is the superpower. It goes well beyond the training plan. It's a program. And the good news is, it is tailored and designed from the ground up for athletes like you. And that's why I believe that we've led more than 1,500 athletes to World Championship events. And so I invite you, become part of the team, transform your performance. 3 steps. Number 1, reach out to us, info@purplepatchfitness.com. We will set up an introductory call. Number 2, choose the best program for your needs. And step 3, get on the program within minutes. It's all with a risk-free approach. Remember, we have a 30-day money-back guarantee. All right, let's finish this up. It is part 3. All right, let's finish the show today by talking about the path to developing some of these high-performance traits. I'm sure that you've read stories or articles of C-suite executives taking on some mammoth challenges. I remember as a kid, Richard Branson, that guy with Virgin, famously tried to fly around the world in a hot air balloon. Completely bonkers. Plenty of executives try and summit Everest or maybe complete an Ironman. Some other big challenge. The question is why? After all, they're already really busy. They've got massive demands at their role at work, and quite often they've got huge responsibilities with their families and friends, maybe some semblance of a social life. But the answer, of course, is layered to this. There is the joy of the commitment and the pride of accomplishment, and we shouldn't relegate that to an afterthought. That's important. Okay, there's a little bit of ego and satisfaction around getting through tough stuff. That draws them because they're high performers. But the truth is that I think there's something a little bit more powerful than that. Because these challenges that leaders tend to love to take on, they realize that by going on the journey, it actually helps them show up and perform better as leaders. The reward is a direct transfer of them becoming a better leader. In other words, it becomes a route for them towards getting an edge in the workplace. Think about it, it's like, how? How does that happen? In other words, aren't we just dumping another thing on top of an already overcompressed life? But the truth is that when I see someone take on a big, hairy, audacious goal, something that's a little uncomfortable, certainly gets them out of the comfort zone, requires a lot of commitment and preparation, it's often a forcing agent. It's an amazing opportunity to create the framework that drives operational efficiency. In other words, the leader is forced into a whole bunch of decision making, filtering out only the important stuff, allowing their energy to go into. In other words, they force optimization, prioritization, and effectiveness. What do they say? If you want something done, give it to a busy person. Now, in addition to this, though, it's not just a great operational efficiency mechanism. There's also the preparation that is necessary. And typically, the goal-driven leaders that I work with often take on challenges that have a huge physical component. And the required preparation that goes into arriving and being successful at that goal typically trends positive in helping that leader showing up on a day-to-day basis with better health, improved energy, better cognitive function, and certainly increasing physical resiliency and staying power. In other words, the training, if we want to call it that, necessary for completion and success often drives their physical daily readiness. And that's a huge component. So suddenly, taking on this thing that at first might look like dumping something on top of life is a forcing agent for operational efficiency and bringing up cognitive function and energy so that they can bring their better selves every single day. And that's great. But there's one other component that's also really powerful to this, and that's through the actual journey itself. I always talk about the journey being the venue of the biggest reward, more than the actual destination, the goal, the event, whatever it might be. Imagine training for an Ironman. Let's just use that because that's the one that's closest to my skill set. It's a huge challenge for anyone. Absolutely. It is probably the most demanding single-day endurance challenge out there. And so in order for anyone to be successful at that, particularly if you're time-starved, you're going to need to be organized, committed. It's going to require some toughness and grit. You're going to need to filter out some of the distractions and the things that are creating noise. So in other words, you're going to need to prioritize. And you typically are going to benefit if you've got someone in partnership, a coach in other words, to help you retain perspective, to reflect, to make decisions, to help you course correct, to organize all of those components. And even with all that in place, the journey it just simply is going to include a whole bunch of setbacks, adversity, and obstacles. And that leader that's decided to take this challenge on is going to have to overcome them. They're going to have to get through these. They're going to have to be adaptable, look for different routes. They're going to have to learn how to manage the setbacks. They're going to need some grit when the going really gets tough. In other words, that journey is training the brain. That's what's occurring there. Remember what we talked about in part 2. Organizations love to hire elite athletes because they know they're going to get someone that is adaptable, resilient, grit. They're going to be tough. They're going to be able to collaborate. And so in other words, this journey is providing the vehicle to actually train the brain. In other words, hone, improve, develop the traits of high performance. And it is through this journey that these traits continue to emerge. They improve. And of course, as I talked about in part 2, these traits are easily applicable to their roles at work. In other words, it helps them become better leaders, greater performance in work. In other words, taking on these challenges, this very big challenge, ends up not being a question of how do they fit it all in, but instead becomes the catalyst of being the vehicle to drive A, both improved organizational effectiveness, B, greater physical performance in every single day there so that they can show up better, process information, make better decisions, and have capacity to respond to external forces. And thirdly, drive and improve the traits of high performance, which you could say are the traits of great leadership. Now, it takes time. It's not a light switch. Just because you enter a big event or something like that doesn't mean that it's just going to happen. But it does emerge and evolve. Now, if that's why a leader does this, just like I talked about earlier with an elite athlete. Here's good news. You don't need to be a CEO to apply these principles to your own performance. You don't need to decide to try and fly a balloon around the world. You don't need to enter an Ironman. You certainly don't need to climb Everest. But all of us, no matter what our purpose is, no matter where we're seeking to improve, we all benefit by taking on a big challenge. We all do. Now, what that challenge is really depends on where your start line is, because it's important to have a challenge that is a little scary and daunting, requires commitment so that you can adhere to the practices and the steps to get you there, but is also ultimately accessible. And so it's no good for me if I've currently completely sedentary to say, I'm going to do an Ironman, because that is just like trying to climb up to the top of Everest in one step. But I could do something that's challenging, that maybe is a reward if I arrive there, but requires commitment. So it's important as you listen to this, I believe, to really consider where's your starting point and what is something that might sound fun, challenging, but goodness me, I'm not sure if I can do that. Then you've got something here. Because when you get out of your comfort zone, when you commit, when you decide and you actually take action to take the very first steps on what will be a journey, I promise you, you will grow. You will improve. Sport, or just a heavy emphasis on personal well-being, in my mind is the perfect vehicle to drive improvements. And it's going to foster the conditions and deliver the experiences that won't always be comfortable, but will help you hone and develop the traits of a high-performance mindset. And I think that's how you should approach it. It is a vehicle for me that I'm going to take on with really pretty risk-free components that I'm going to feel better and show up better. And ultimately, that's going to drive high performance. And so, coming back to the original question, remember, it was asked about those Olympic swimmers that seemed so calm, could step up to the occasion, that navigated all of the adversity. Is there anything we can learn from that? It's like, yes, there's nothing magic to it. There isn't. They've just gone through years of development, and you can too. Because that mindset is a result of their journey, of their experiences. And the good news is it's absolutely accessible and applicable for all of us. I want to finish today with a quote. It's from Pat, a CEO who I've coached for many years. And I think that his words really encapsulate much of what I'm talking about today. He was in a point of reflection and he decided to write me an email, unsolicited. I'm going to read out one section of it because it's quite nice for me, but it also really tells a story. Here's what Pat said. He said, I didn't anticipate the results when I first came to you for help. I was chasing improvements in my triathlon performance, but the process completely evolved how I operate as a leader. I established skills and habits that improved my effectiveness, my capacity to navigate stressful situations, and the process helped me retain perspective and focus when the going got tough. In other words, the journey of my sport increased my physical resilience, but also my mindset and brain received the best training possible, and it informs all I do in leadership and life. Goodness me. Thanks, folks. That is a high-performance mindset. I'll see you next time. Guys, thanks so much for joining, and thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed the new format. You can never miss an episode by simply subscribing. Head to the Purple Patch channel of YouTube and you will find it there and you could subscribe. Of course, I'd like to ask you, if you will subscribe, also share it with your friends, and it's really helpful if you leave a nice positive review in the comments. Now, any questions that you have, let me know. Feel free to add a comment and I will try my best to respond and support you on your performance journey. And in fact, as we commence this video podcast experience, if you have any feedback at all, as mentioned earlier in the show, we would love your help in helping us to improve. Simply email us at info@purplepatchfitness.com or leave it in the comments of the show at the Purple Patch page, and we will get you dialed in. We'd love constructive feedback. We are in a growth mindset, as we like to call it. And so feel free to share with your friends. But as I said, let's build this together. Let's make it something special. It's really fun. We're really trying hard to make it a special experience, and we want to welcome you into the Purple Patch community. With that, I hope you have a great week. Stay healthy, have fun, keep smiling, doing whatever you do. Take care.